In this lesson, we'll import a tool library to the cloud. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to change user preferences, use import tool library to add tools to the cloud, and identify components in an assembly. In this lesson, we're going to get started with the supplied dataset multi-axis positioning.f3d. We're going to take a look at this assembly, but first I want to take a look at our user preferences to make sure we're starting on the same page. So first we're going to go up to our name and our user preferences. Inside of here, I want to navigate to the manufacturer section. I'm going to make sure that I have Enable Cloud Libraries turned on. This is going to allow me to use cloud libraries whenever we're setting up our tool libraries. Also note that there are several different display properties that are turned on and off. Now these are generally defaults, but if you've made any adjustments to these, then your toolpaths and operations in the browser might look different. Another thing I want to mention is going to be in the default units section. Right now, my default units for design are set to metric, and my default units for manufacture are also set to metric. If you are constantly using the inch unit system, then it's helpful to set your defaults to inch. I'm going to leave mine as default from here, and simply note that we are going to be modifying those as needed. Another section I want to make sure we mention is going to be the general section for the modeling orientation. Right now, the default modeling orientation is Z up. However, the design that we have open, multi-axis positioning, is set up in a Y up orientation. Depending on how something was modeled or designed in Fusion, it may be in a different orientation. It is possible to use commands such as move copy and reset your coordinate system so that Z is pointing up. However, when we get into the manufacturer workspace, we're going to be setting up our WCS based on the components that we have access to. So I'm not going to make any adjustments to these modeling positions. The last thing that I do want to mention is in something called preview features. We're going to navigate to manufacture. We're going to hide the extensions as well as the insider preview features, just showing our public preview features. Inside of here, you'll notice that there are several things that are turned on by default and some things that might be off by default. For example, automatically get latest posts and machines. I'm going to leave this on, and it's currently in preview, but this allows us direct access to new machines that get added. You'll notice that most of these are off, but notice that we do have setup sheet configurations. This enables the creation of custom setup sheet configurations. We'll talk about this later on in the lessons when we get to creating our own setup sheets. Also note that on by default is tool library. Now, this is actually a feature that was added quite a while ago where the new tool library is automatically set to on by default. Eventually, the old tool library will likely be phased out and this will no longer be an option. So we're going to make sure that we have this turned on. We can also note the updated styling. This is a sneak peek of the style update in progress for the Fusion Manufacturer dialogues. We're not going to be turning this on or any other preview feature right now. Just notice that there are several things in here that might be interesting for you to play with. Now that we've taken a look at setting up those defaults, let's move on to taking a look at the design that we have. Right now we're dealing with a multi-axis positioning, which has a fixture assembly. There's a stock prep fixture, our link, which is the actual part we're going to machine, and our stock. When we take a look at this, we want to notice that the stock has a feature carved in the bottom of it. When we look at this, this is a typical way that we would hold a part in a multi-axis fixture. Sometimes, depending on the manufacturer, for example, if you're using Raptor clamps, this might actually be a dovetail rather than just two parallel sides that are cut. For our purposes, we're going to be using this manufacturing model as we move forward, and we're not going to be spending a lot of time on setting up these features as they're fairly simple to create, and at this point you should be fairly comfortable with creating simple geometry in Fusion. We will be creating some soft jaws later on in the course, but for right now, we just want to make sure we understand exactly what we have on the screen. I'm going to go back to a home view and note that we do have a joints folder, which shows that we have several components that are fixed or rigid groups, allowing us to understand that we do have multiple components we're dealing with inside of the fixture, which has its own joints that allow certain components to slide. If we take a look at this, you'll notice that we can't manually slide anything. And that's because we've got some fixed components in relation to some of the other parts in the design. But note that this fixture is coming in with all the appropriate joints to allow it to move and clamp onto components. We just have it accurately positioned already, so we're not going to worry about moving anything around. We haven't made any changes to the design, but we want to make sure always that we save often, capturing those versions before we move on. We do also want to make sure that we import our tool library. This will be done in the manufacturer workspace. Notice that the units are set to inch, but currently there's nothing else in here. There's no operations or toolpaths, there's no setup. Before we get into that, we can go into Manage and Tool Library and make sure that we have our multi-axis tools. Notice that this document already contains several tools, and I already have 2 cloud libraries, a 3-axis and a Pure 9 library. What I want to do is I want to start by clicking on Cloud. I can right-click and I can import a library. Once we're prompted with our File Explorer, we want to navigate to the location of our multi-axis tool library. This will be a .tools file, and we'll select Open. This will place our new library in the cloud and show us all of the different tools that are inside of this library we just imported. It shows us all the parameters when we click on each, and we'll be able to use these in future programs. For right now, let's go ahead and close this. And before we save this design, I want to move on to one other utilities option. Inside of the utilities, we have something called automatic in-process stock generation. This allows us to display the stock removed with each operation by simply selecting it in the browser. This also has different consequences when we start to simulate our operations. For the purpose of this course, we're going to make sure that this is turned on. And note that we have the options for stock visibility in the bottom center of our canvas, and also the ability to synchronize those views. We want to make sure that this is on to start with, and as we go through, if we want to turn it off, we certainly can. But for right now, let's make sure that we do save the design and then move on to our next step.